Hi, I'm Subject 36. This is my Synthesizer Sound Design 101.
This is how a basic synthesizer works. You gotta generate a sound somehow, and you play your keyboard, and what happens? Well, you have an oscillator. And the oscillator creates the initial sound of this synthesizer. And it does so by generating a sound wave based on the pitch that you play on your keyboard. And the sound waves are usually in the form of either a triangle, a sawtooth, a square wave, or some kind of noise. So the oscillator creates this sound and you control the pitch through your keyboard. However, we also need to create how the sound is actually played. When does it start? When does it stop? And how does it decay? And thereby we introduce a new component, the voltage controlled amplifier, the VCA. Now the VCA in itself is just a volume knob that you either have all the way up or all the way down or somewhere in the middle. And you can change it over time. So we introduce an automatic way to do this where we can shape the sound. And that is the ADSR. So the ADSR is actually a controller that controls this voltage controlled amplifier, this volume knob, and it does so by simply having a program of how fast of attack should this sound have, how should it work in the middle, the decay and the sustain, and how should it ring off in the end. So, for example, if we have a sound with a very snappy attack, a small attack value, it would start very quickly, like this. But if we dial up the attack and make it a bit slower, it could sound like this. Yeah. And in the end, we can have a very fast release, sounding like this, or a very slow release, sounding like this. So now we can play our instrument, we can generate sound that we like, and we can also control how it's played in terms of volume. But this is where the synthesizer personality really comes into play. So now we introduce the filter. Now the filter is a way to shape the sound and to make it more unique, more emotional, and especially also more performance-based as well, because the filter is something that you usually work with while performing. So now when I have the sound here, I have a filter, and the filter is what we call all open. That means that the filter lets all sound pass through. So the filter is actually a very simple component. It lets sound through on either the higher side of the spectrum, a high pass filter, or on the lower side of the spectrum, a low pass filter. And what you do is you dial in a frequency where the cutoff point will happen. And then depending on which filter you have in your synthesizer, the way that the sound will roll off in these areas will differ quite a lot and make quite a lot of personality implications on this sound. So I have, for example, a filter here which is fully open, sounding like this. Now this is a so-called low pass filter, meaning that every sound beneath the frequency point that I set will pass through the sound. However, if I dial it down a bit, you can hear that only the darker part of the sound is actually let through. Now this is pretty useful when I'm doing a bass. We can also dial the filter up a bit and let more sound through. And we can change the filter while playing. And this can also be controlled through something called a low frequency oscillator. But more about that later. Suffice to say that you control the filter with either turning a knob or pressing your keys a little bit harder, or using the modulation wheel on your synthesizer. There are various methods of controlling the filter on the synthesizer. Now, on the filter, you usually also have one more knob that you can work with, a peak value. And the peak value will actually create a bump in the frequency spectrum when you do this high pass or low pass fall off. This peak will create quite a tough sound, quite a harsh sound in that particular area. And you can play around with this and do very, very unique sounds. Something like this. There I played with the peak value. So, this is the filter. Now what we have here is a fully working synth. We have the oscillator creating the initial sound wave. We have the VCA and the ADSR connected together, which are actually controlling this sound. And then we have the filter, which gives the sound more personality and makes it more performance-based. So this is basically everything you need to have a fully working synthesizer with its own personality that you can work with both in the studio and as a live performance instrument.
Hope you got something out of that. Please leave a comment below, subscribe, and I'll see you in the future.